Before our world, there was another. Before the first human story was ever told, the Earth itself was telling a very different and much grander epic. To find its beginning, we must travel back 66 million years to the final days of a dynasty that had ruled the planet for longer than we can truly comprehend. This is a journey to a world without memory of us because we did not yet exist. The planet we arrive on is both familiar and alien. It is Earth, but it is not our Earth. The continents themselves are in the wrong places, slowly drifting towards the shapes we know today. And the most dramatic difference lies in the heart of North America. The America of this age was not a single solid landmass. It was a continent divided. A great, shallow ocean, known to us as the Western Interior Seaway, split the continent vertically down its center. This was not a river or a lake. It was a vast, warm, and vibrant sea stretching for thousands of miles from the tropical waters of the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the cold currents of the Arctic. It was the liquid heart of a prehistoric world. This lost ocean created two Americas, two island continents that evolved in near total isolation from one another. To the east was Appalachia, an older, more stable land of dense forests and rolling hills. Its story is a quiet one, a mystery we will not explore today. Our story, our empire, lies to the west, on the shores of this great sea. This was the continent of Laramidia, a younger, more dynamic, and more violent land. A long, narrow island, squeezed between the rising spine of the young Rocky Mountains and the warm, murky waters of the inland sea. This was the crucible of evolution, a hot, humid, and fertile world that served as the perfect stage for the final act of the dinosaurs. This was the empire of the tyrant lizard king, T-Rex's kingdom. The world was loud then, not with the noise of machines, but with the cacophony of life itself. The air was filled with the calls of strange birds and the buzz of insects. The ground trembled with the footfalls of herds so large they would stretch from one horizon to the other. The oceans and rivers churned with predators of an impossible scale. It was a planet in its vibrant, chaotic prime, a world that felt as if it would last forever. It was a world that had not yet learned the meaning of catastrophe. This was the map of their world, two continents separated by a forgotten ocean, a stage teeming with life, unaware of its own fragility. But eternity was an illusion. Beneath the thunder of life, the planet itself was breathing heavy, feverish, restless, alive in ways both beautiful and dangerous. To understand this kingdom, we must feel its fever. The climate of the Late Cretaceous was a world away from our own. It was a planet running a high fever, a hothouse world operating under a different set of rules. The single greatest difference was this. In the age of Tyrannosaurus Rex, the world did not have winter. There was no snow, no ice, no frost. There was only a long, unending, and profoundly wet summer. The engine of this global greenhouse was the air itself. The atmosphere was rich in carbon dioxide, at a concentration of around 1,000 parts per million. For comparison, our modern world is just over 400. This thick blanket of CO2 trapped the sun's heat with incredible efficiency, raising the planet's average temperature by as much as 10 degrees Celsius compared to today. This warmth was not confined to the equator, it spread across the entire globe. In this era, there were no polar ice caps. The North and South Poles were not frozen wastelands, but temperate, lush landscapes. Great green forests of conifers and ferns grew in lands where today there is only miles-thick ice. It was a world without a cold refuge, a planet where life and the great reptiles that thrived in the heat could exist from pole to pole. To breathe this air would have been a strange sensation. It was heavy, dense with moisture from the vast warm seas. It would have felt like walking through a perpetual steam room. The humidity was so high that the air itself felt wet against the skin. This moisture fueled a dramatic and violent weather cycle. The rains, when they came, were not gentle showers. They were monsoons, torrential downpours that could last for days, turning the great river deltas into churning seas of mud and water. Then, just as quickly, the sun would return, and the steaming heat would rise from the damp earth, completing the cycle of suffocating humidity. This combination of high carbon dioxide, constant warmth, and abundant moisture turned the entire planet into a vast, self-sustaining garden. The high CO2 levels acted as a super fertilizer for plant life, allowing vegetation to grow at an explosive rate. Life was everywhere, and it was big. The warm climate allowed cold-blooded reptiles to reach sizes they could never achieve in our cooler world, and the sheer abundance of plant life provided the fuel for the colossal herbivores they fed upon. This was the global climate, a hothouse planet, an endless summer, a world without winter. It was a paradise of growth, but it was a harsh and demanding paradise. And like every paradise, its beauty was best understood up close. From orbit, the Earth was a blazing sphere of green and gold, but down below, life was lived in the humidity, in the breath of the swamp, in the fragile heartbeat of the morning. To truly understand what it was like to live in this world, we must leave the global view behind. We must zoom in to a single continent, a single ecosystem, and witness the start of a single day. Let us travel to the misty swamps of Laramidia as the first weak rays of the Cretaceous sun begin to break over the horizon. The Cretaceous sun rises weak and pale over the swamps of Laramidia. Then a sound breaks the morning silence, not a roar but a deep guttural rumble like a distant engine turning over. It is followed by the heavy snap of a giant branch. In the mist, a shape begins to move, a living mountain of muscle and bone. As the sun climbs higher, burning away the last of the fog, the herd is revealed. A family of triceratops. They have spent the night in a defensive circle, their massive bodies shielding the younger, more vulnerable members from the unseen dangers of the dark. Now, the great patriarch, its scarred frill and long brow horns gleaming in the new light, leads them out into the open. They move with a slow, deliberate, and unstoppable purpose. Their immense, three-toed feet sink deep into the soft earth, the ground trembling slightly with their passage. They are not walking. They are marching. They are heading towards the water's edge to drink before the day's heat sets in and the great predators begin to stir. The young ones stay in the protected center of the herd, their small, undeveloped horns a mere hint of the formidable weapons they will one day carry. The adults on the perimeter are a wall of shields and spears, their great heads swinging slowly from side to side, their ancient eyes constantly scanning the dense tree line. This scene, this quiet morning ritual, is the very soul of the Late Cretaceous in North America, and we know it in such intimate detail because this world was perfectly designed to preserve its own memories. The mud that these creatures walked upon, the sediment from the yearly floods, became their tomb and their monument. When one of them fell, whether to a predator or to old age, the rising waters would quickly cover its bones, protecting them from scavengers and the elements, beginning the long, slow process of fossilization. Today, in the Badlands of Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas, paleontologists explore a vast geological archive known as the Hell Creek Formation. It is the fossilized echo of this very world. Every layer of stone they uncover was once the soft mud of a Cretaceous morning. Every fossil they find, every bone, every tooth is a photograph, a final frozen moment from a day like this one. Each layer of rock carries the last breath of a life, the last beat of a heart. These layers of stone are the final pages of their story. But before their story was written in rock, it was written in the air they breathed, in the living pulse of a world that was still green, still loud, still alive. To read that older chapter, we must turn the page backward, from stone to soil, from fossil to leaf. For before this world turned to rock, it was a jungle, not of grass, but of something stranger. This was not a world of grass and familiar fields. It was a world of alien green. The world the Triceratops walked upon was a world of alien green. To a modern eye, it would be almost unrecognizable. Great magnolia trees, some of the earliest flowering lineages, opened their huge, fragrant, plate-sized blossoms to the humid air. The surfaces of the swamps were decorated with the brilliant whites and pinks of primitive water lilies. The undergrowth was a riot of strange new colors and shapes. This botanical revolution triggered another. Where flowers appear, so too do their partners. The air itself was alive. It was thick, not just with humidity, but with a constant shimmering haze of pollen, spores, and for the first time, a sky filled with the hum of pollinating insects. The first primitive bees and butterflies began their intricate dance with the new flowers. They were the messengers of this new world, carrying genetic information from one plant to another, accelerating the pace of evolution and painting the continent of Laramidia with a palette of colors it had never seen before. This symbiotic relationship, this partnership between flower and insect, was a new invention of nature, a force that would shape the future of all life on Earth. Above this new, colorful undergrowth stood the old giants of the plant kingdom. The canopy was a dark, towering ceiling of ancient conifers, relatives of our modern redwoods, their immense trunks rising like the pillars of a natural cathedral. Among them, the elegant fan-shaped leaves of ginkgo trees and the feathery fronds of giant cycads, which looked like a cross between a palm tree and a fern, created a dense, multi-layered world. Light struggled to reach the forest floor, filtering down in a dim, emerald twilight. This was the great engine of the Cretaceous, an endless planetary garden fueled by a supercharged atmosphere and brought to life by a new, revolutionary partnership between flowers and insects. This explosion of life, this planet-wide, all-you-can-eat buffet of leaves, stems, and blossoms made one thing possible. It made giants possible. And where there is abundance, there is hunger. Across the vast, swampy floodplains of Laramidia, the great consumers of this green ocean were gathering, colossal herds that would shake the very foundations of the continent. The great green ocean of Laramidia was not an empty garden. It was a kingdom defined by its consumers, and there were no consumers more significant, more impactful than the great herds of the duck-billed dinosaurs, the hadrosaurs. To witness one of these herds on the move was to witness a force of nature, a living earthquake. It would begin not as a sight, but as a feeling. A low, deep-frequency rumble, felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. The ground itself would begin to hum with a steady, rhythmic vibration. And then they would appear over the horizon, not as individual animals, but as a single, moving landscape. A river of flesh and bone, thousands strong, flowing across the vast floodplains. This was the world of Edmontosaurus. Individually, each animal was a giant, weighing up to 5 tons and stretching nearly 40 feet from its broad, flattened beak to the tip of its powerful tail. They were mountains of muscle, built to consume the tough vegetation of the Cretaceous. Their distinctive duck bill was not soft, but was a complex grinding machine, housing hundreds of tightly packed teeth, a dental battery capable of pulverizing the toughest ferns and branches. Moving together, their calls would echo for miles, a chorus of low, booming, horn-like sounds, a constant stream of communication that held the massive herd together. They were a city on the move. The young and the weak were kept in the protected center, while the larger, stronger adults formed a vigilant perimeter. Their sheer numbers were their primary defense, a strategy of overwhelming any potential threat through sheer scale. But for all their size, for all their collective power, their existence was one of perpetual, gnawing anxiety. They were giants, but they were not kings. They were prey, and they knew it. Every moment of their lives was governed by a deep, instinctual fear. As the great herd spread out across a floodplain to graze, there was no peace. Every head would lift in unison at the snap of a twig. Every eye was constantly scanning the dark, silent edge of the forest. Every nostril was tasting the air, searching for a single, terrifying scent. They were listening for a footfall heavier than their own. They were watching for a shadow that did not belong. They were smelling for the presence of the one creature that did not fear their numbers. The one creature that saw their colossal herd not as an unstoppable force, but as a walking feast. The king. And in the cool, dark shadows of the ancient conifer forests, the king was always watching. He was patient. He did not need to rush. He knew the rhythm of the herd, their patterns, their fears. He was waiting for a single moment of weakness, a juvenile that strayed too far from the group, an old male that could no longer keep up, an individual weakened by sickness. He was Tyrannosaurus Rex, and this was his hunting ground. But the story of the king cannot be told through the trembling eyes of his prey. To understand him, we must change our vantage, leave the fear behind, and step into the mind of power itself. To the great herds of Edmontosaurus, he was a walking nightmare, a shadow that brought with it the promise of a sudden and violent end. But to understand the Tyrannosaurus Rex, we must see him not as a monster, but as a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering, a creature perfectly designed to rule its world. To be a Tyrannosaurus was to experience the world through scent, and when that story led him to his target, he would unleash the most formidable weapon in the history of terrestrial life: his bite. The jaw of a Tyrannosaurus Rex was not merely a tool for cutting meat, it was an instrument of annihilation. With a bite force estimated at nearly 6 tons of pressure, it could crush the bones of its victims as easily as we might snap a twig. Imagine the force required to crumple the steel door of a modern car as if it were paper. The T-Rex could exert that pressure with every single bite. Its teeth, thick and conical like railroad spikes, were designed not to slice, but to puncture, shatter, and destroy, giving it access to the rich, nutritious bone marrow that was locked away from lesser predators. For decades, we have debated whether this magnificent creature was a noble hunter or a lowly scavenger. The truth is, he was both, and that is the very definition of a king. A true apex predator is an opportunist. It does not waste energy. If a carcass left by a storm or another lesser predator was available, the T-Rex would claim it without hesitation, its immense size an undeniable claim of ownership. But when hunger demanded it, it was also a hunter of terrifying efficiency, capable of ambushing and taking down multi-ton herbivores. He was not just a killer, he was the great balancer, the final checkpoint in the ecosystem of Laramidia. He was nature's recycling system. By consuming the weak, the old, and the dead, he prevented the spread of disease and ensured that only the strongest of the great herds would survive and pass on their genes. The nutrients locked within the colossal bodies of the dead were, through him, returned to the earth. His brutal existence was a necessary part of the cycle that allowed the endless green world to thrive. This was the king, a creature of immense power, a walking paradox of hunter and recycler, a being that defined the daylight hours in Laramidia. But his reign, like the sun's, was not absolute. Even kings must sleep, and when the light faded and the great tyrant settled into the shadows to rest, the world he ruled did not fall silent. It changed hands. The setting of the Cretaceous sun did not bring peace to Laramidia. It brought a changing of the guard. The colossal, earth-shaking dramas of the day gave way to a million smaller, quieter, and far more cunning struggles in the dark. As the great tyrant rested, the forest he ruled came alive in a different way. The air, still heavy and humid, filled with a new kind of symphony. The deep, thunderous bellows of the daylight herds faded, replaced by the high-pitched chorus of insects, the croaks of primitive frogs, and the furtive rustle of unseen creatures moving through the fern-carpeted undergrowth. The crown of the night belonged not to the giants, but to the small, the swift, and the silent. For this was a forest that never truly slept. In the deep shadows, a pair of large, luminous eyes would watch from the tree line. This was the hour of the true dawn. By day, this small, bird-like predator was a minor player, staying clear of the larger hunters. But by night, it was a king in its own right. With a brain proportionally larger than most other dinosaurs and eyes perfectly adapted for seeing in the dark, it was a hunter of formidable intelligence. It would move with a ghostly silence, not seeking a direct confrontation, but looking for an opportunity. A poorly guarded nest filled with eggs, a small mammal that had strayed too far from its burrow. The Troodon was a creature of cunning, not of brute force. And in the tunnels beneath the forest floor, the true survivors of this age were stirring. Our ancestors. The small, furry Didelphodon, a marsupial of the deep past, would emerge into the cool night. Its world was not one of sight, but of scent and touch. Its long whiskers would brush against the damp leaves, its sensitive nose reading the complex story of the forest floor, a map of edible roots, insects, and the terrifying scent of nearby predators. Its entire existence was a testament to the strategy of staying hidden, of living in the cracks of a world dominated by giants. Even some of the larger creatures had their own role in this nocturnal world. A herd of ornithomimus, the ostrich-like dinosaurs, might still be active in the twilight, their great eyes allowing them to see in the fading light. They would move quickly through the clearings, snatching up large insects and scattering the seeds of the plants they ate, acting as the accidental gardeners of the Cretaceous night. But the constant, low-level hum of this nocturnal life was a fragile piece. This forest was a trap. Every creature, from the Troodon to the Didelphodon, knew a fundamental rule that was written into their very DNA. The sound of the forest was the sound of life, the sound of normalcy. The true terror was not the noise. It was the sudden, unnatural silence, when the chirping of the insects would stop in a wave, when the rustling in the undergrowth would freeze, when the very air seemed to hold its breath. That silence had a name. It was the sound of a large predator on the move. It was the sound of death, walking on silent feet. This was the secret life of the Cretaceous night, a world of silent hunters and hidden survivors, a constant quiet war fought in the shadows of the sleeping giants. But the darkness was not only a place of fear, it was also a place of thought. For this ecosystem was far more than a simple struggle between big and small, hunter and hunted. Beneath the surface of the great hunts and the panicked stampedes, there pulsed a hidden layer of complexity, a network of surprising intelligence, of ancient strategies and silent communication. The age of dinosaurs was not merely an age of muscle, it was also, in its own strange way, an age of minds. Let us return now to the hunter of the night, the Troodon. We have called it a cunning thief, but that description barely scratches the surface. This was not a creature operating on pure instinct. This was a problem solver, a dinosaur capable of planning, of learning from its mistakes, and perhaps even of teaching its young. While we cannot know for sure, it is easy to imagine them using complex, coordinated strategies to distract a mother dinosaur while another member of the pack steals an egg from the nest. They were a testament to the fact that in the Cretaceous, intelligence, not just size, was a powerful tool for survival, but intelligence was not just for hunting, it was also for community. Across the Great Plains, another sound would have echoed, a sound unlike any other in the history of our planet, a deep, haunting, and strangely musical call. This was the voice of the Parasaurolophus. This great duck-billed dinosaur possessed one of the most bizarre and wonderful features of any creature, a long, hollow, bony crest that swept back from its skull. For decades, scientists debated its purpose. Was it a snorkel, a weapon? The truth, we now believe, is far more elegant. This crest was a natural trombone. By forcing air through the intricate hollow passages within the crest, the Parasaurolophus could create a powerful, low-frequency sound, a resonant call that could travel for miles through the dense forests and open plains. This was not a simple roar. It was a language, a complex series of calls to warn the herd of a distant T-Rex, to coordinate their movements during migration, to call out to a potential mate. The different shapes and sizes of the crests between species, and even between males and females, suggest a rich and varied acoustic world. To stand in the Cretaceous twilight and hear the haunting melodic calls of a herd of Parasaurolophus echoing across the valley would have been to listen to a conversation 66 million years old. Intelligence and communication were hidden in the ecosystem, but so was sheer, unbelievable scale. While the T-Rex was the undisputed king of the northern plains of Laramidia in the far south, in the lands that would one day become Texas and New Mexico, a different kind of giant moved through the forests, a creature from an older, more ancient lineage, the last of the great sauropods, a Lamasaurus. This was a creature so vast, it almost existed on a different plane of reality. As tall as a 6-story building, and weighing perhaps over 70 tons, it dwarfed even the mightiest Tyrannosaurus. But unlike the noisy, dramatic herds of hadrosaurs, the great sauropods are thought to have been quiet, slow-moving giants. A single Alamosaurus, or a small family group, would move through the forest like a silent, walking mountain, its long neck reaching high into the canopy to browse on leaves that no other creature could touch. It was so large, so powerful, that few, if any, predators would have dared to challenge a healthy adult. It was a living monument, a quiet, gentle giant in a world of noise and violence, a relic from a bygone age of even bigger titans. This was a world of hidden complexities, the cunning of the small hunter, the complex song of the herd, and the silent passage of the true giants. These creatures lived, breathed, and communicated in a vibrant, living ecosystem. But their lives, their sounds, their struggles were fleeting. What endured was not their voices, but the silence that followed. The only thing that would last, the only thing that would carry their story to us across 66 million years, was the mud and the water of the great shining rivers that were the lifeblood of their world and would become the pages of their history. The story of a lost world is written in stone, but before it was stone, it was mud, and before it was mud, it was a river. The great shining rivers of Laramidia were the arteries of this Cretaceous world, the source of its fertility, the stage for its greatest dramas, and ultimately, the patient historians that would preserve its memory for 66 million years. These were not the tame, predictable rivers we know today. Born from the constant erosion of the young and volatile Rocky Mountains to the west, they were powerful, chaotic forces of nature. They carried with them a heavy load of volcanic ash and mineral-rich sediment. As they snaked their way across the low-lying plains, they would constantly change course, carving new paths, creating new swamps, and depositing their precious cargo of sediment across the vast deltas. This sediment was the foundation of the entire ecosystem, the fertile soil that fueled the endless green ocean of plant life. The rivers gave life, but the rivers also took it away, and in doing so, they became the ultimate archivists. The seasonal floods were the mechanism of this preservation. When the torrential, monsoon-like rains came, the rivers would swell and overflow their banks, covering the floodplains in a thick, murky blanket of water and mud. An animal that died on that plain, a triceratops falling to a tyrannosaur, an old Edmontosaurus succumbing to sickness, would be quickly covered by this new layer of soft, oxygen-poor sediment. This rapid burial was an act of perfect preservation. It shielded the remains from the gnawing teeth of scavengers and the slow, destructive work of the elements. The river that had nourished the creature in life became its tomb in death, gently cradling its bones and beginning the long, slow process of fossilization, where minerals would gradually replace bone, turning a fleeting moment of life into an eternal artifact of stone. Year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium, this cycle repeated. A season of life, a flood, a layer of mud. A season of life, a flood, a layer of mud. This process turned the entire continent of Laramidia into a giant layered cake of time. It was a photo album, and each flood was the click of the shutter, capturing a single, frozen instant. Today, paleontologists read this photo album. They travel to the arid badlands of North America to places like the Hell Creek Formation, the Lance Formation, and the Judith River Formation. To an untrained eye, these are just layers of colored rock and dust, but to a scientist, they are the pages of a story. They can see the dark lines of ancient soils, the layers of volcanic ash that mark a distant eruption, and the thick seams of sandstone that show where a great river once flowed. And within these layers, they find the words of the story, the fossilized pollen that tells them which flowers were blooming, the fossilized leaves that paint a picture of the ancient forests, and the colossal bones of the creatures that called this world home. Every layer tells a story, the story of a life, the story of a death, and the story of a flood. And so the shining rivers wrote the final silent history of the land, a patient narrative told in layers of mud and bone. It is a story we are still to this day learning how to read. But the chronicles of this world were not confined to the ground. Some stories were written higher, carried not by rivers, but by the wind. For above this land of giants and floods, another equally dramatic saga was unfolding, the story of the titans of the sky. The history of Laramidia was not only written in the mud of its shining rivers, it was also written in the air. The sky of the Late Cretaceous was not an empty space between the clouds. It was a second ocean, an atmosphere so thick and warm it was a habitat in itself. It was a three-dimensional world with its own rules, its own ecosystems, and its own terrifying titans. For millions of years, the undisputed rulers of this realm had been the pterosaurs. These were not dinosaurs, but a separate, ancient lineage of flying reptiles. On the coasts of the great inland sea, the most common sight would have been the pteranodon, gliding with an effortless grace that bordered on the supernatural. With wingspans stretching over 20 feet, these were not birds. They were living kites, masters of the thermal updrafts, capable of soaring for hundreds of miles without a single flap of their leathery wings. Their great, bony crests would have sliced through the hazy air as they cast long, fleeting shadows on the waves below, their eyes scanning for the telltale shimmer of a school of fish near the surface. But further inland, over the foothills of the young mountains, a far larger and more terrifying shadow could sometimes be seen. The shadow of Quetzalcoatlus. This was not just a flying reptile, it was a flying monster, the largest flying creature of all time, with a wingspan rivaling that of a modern jet fighter and standing as tall as a giraffe when on the ground. Quetzalcoatlus was the apex predator of the sky. It was not a fish eater, It was a stalker of the land, gliding silently over the plains, its immense shadow passing over herds of smaller dinosaurs before it would descend on its long, stilt-like legs to snatch an unsuspecting victim with its massive, toothless beak. It was a walking, flying nightmare. These ancient titans, the pterosaurs, represented the old guard, the silent, majestic rulers of an established dynasty. But their reign was being challenged. The sky was growing noisier. A new, more energetic, and far more numerous type of creature was filling the air. The first true birds. The coastlines were alive with them. Great, chaotic flocks of ichthyornis, a creature that looked and behaved almost exactly like a modern gull, would swarm over the beaches and estuaries. They were aggressive, opportunistic, and loud. Their screeching calls would have been a constant backdrop to the sound of the waves, but a closer look would reveal their ancient heritage. A beak filled with small, sharp, reptilian teeth. They were a bridge between two worlds, a living fossil in their own time. In the water itself, another bird, Hesperornis, had given up the sky entirely to conquer the sea. This large, flightless diving bird was a master of the aquatic hunt, a prehistoric cormorant that propelled itself with powerful legs in pursuit of fish. It too had a beak lined with teeth, a reminder that the age of reptiles still held a firm grip, even on these new, feathered creatures. The sky was an evolving orchestra. The slow, silent, sonorous music of the gliding pterosaurs was being slowly replaced by the fast, chaotic, and high-pitched melody of the flapping, squawking birds. Feathers, a remarkable evolutionary innovation, were proving to be more versatile and efficient than the leathery membranes of the old rulers. The wings of this era were a canvas of experimentation, used for flight, for gliding, for balance, for display, and for swimming. This was the orchestra of the Cretaceous sky, a symphony of ancient titans and new pretenders, of leathery wings and nascent feathers. The story written in the air was one of constant, relentless change. But the greatest dramas of this lost world, the most terrifying of its titans, and the true heart of its vibrant ecosystem, did not live on the land or in the air. They lived below. Beneath the shimmering sunlit skin of the planet, another world waited, older, stranger, and far more immense. Let us now leave the world of solid ground and breathable air. Let us plunge beneath the shining surface of the western interior seaway and descend into a realm with different rules, a world of green-filtered light and slow, patient motion. The water here is not the clear, crystalline blue of a modern tropical reef. It is a murky, greenish-brown soup, thick with life. The constant flow of nutrient-rich sediment from the rivers of Laramidia, combined with the relentless Cretaceous sun, fuels vast, galaxy-sized blooms of plankton. This microscopic forest is the true engine of this inland ocean, the foundation upon which an empire of giants is built. And this engine has a legacy. Over millions of years, the trillions upon trillions of these microscopic organisms would die and settle on the seafloor in a thick organic layer. Under the immense pressure of the water and the passage of geological time, this layer would be cooked and compressed, transforming into the vast deposits of petroleum that lie beneath the Great Plains today. The fuel that powers our modern civilization is the compressed ghost of this ancient, living sea. In the dimly lit depths, other, larger ghosts swam. The seafloor was littered with the giant coiled shells of the ammonites, some as large as a manhole cover. These were not the passive creatures we imagine from their fossilized remains. They were active, jet-propelled predators, their many tentacles reaching out from their shells to snatch crabs and other crustaceans from the murky depths, their complex eyes watching for the ever-present danger that lurked above. That danger often came in the form of Siphactinus, a 6-meter-long bulldog-faced predatory fish with a maw of needle-sharp teeth. They were the wolves of this ocean, moving in packs, their powerful bodies cutting through the water as they hunted the ammonites and great schools of smaller fish. Their ferocity is forever captured in stone, in one of the most famous fossils ever found, a Xiphactinus with a perfectly preserved smaller fish still in its belly, a testament to a final greedy meal. But these were all secondary players in a kingdom that belonged to one ultimate ruler, a creature that held the same absolute power in the water as the Tyrannosaurus held on the land. This was the kingdom of the mosasaur. You would not hear it coming. You would simply feel a change in the pressure, a sudden scattering of the smaller fish. A great dark shadow would pass overhead, eclipsing the green sunlight from above. It was a reptilian leviathan, a 60-foot-long torpedo of muscle and teeth, the final word in marine evolution. Its double-hinged jaw allowed it to swallow its prey whole, while a second inner row of teeth on its palate ensured that once caught, nothing ever escaped. The mosasaur was the undisputed, absolute monarch of the Western Interior Seaway. This was the silent, brutal, and perfectly balanced kingdom beneath the waves, a self-contained world with its own food chain, its own giants, and its own undisputed king. But even the mighty mosasaur, the tyrant of the deep, lived at the mercy of a far greater force. A force born not of tooth or muscle, but of heat rising from the supercharged atmosphere and the steaming waters of this ancient sea. It was a force that could, in a single day, erase the boundaries between land, sky, and ocean. The season of the great storms was approaching. In this world of endless summer, the cycle of life was not governed by the cold of winter, but by the violence of the storm season. Several times each year, the rhythm of the planet would change. A new energy would charge the air, a sense of immense gathering power that every creature, from the smallest mammal in its burrow to the great Tyrannosaurus in its domain, could feel in its bones. It would begin with the sky. The hazy, yellowish white of a normal day would slowly be replaced by an eerie, sickly green. The air, usually thick and heavy, would become unnervingly still and strangely cool. The constant hum of insects would die down. The birds would fall silent. The great herds would become restless, moving away from the rivers and towards the shelter of the high ground. They all knew the signs. The monsoon was coming. On the horizon, over the warm waters of the inland sea, the clouds would begin to gather, not the fluffy white clouds of our world, but a dark, bruised purple wall of moisture, miles thick, that would climb higher and higher, swallowing the sky. It was a breathing monster, a living mountain of air and water, drawing its power from the heat of the planet. Then, the first gust of wind would arrive, a cool herald of the chaos to come, and with it, the first drops of rain, fat and heavy, striking the giant fern leaves with a sound like a drumbeat. Within minutes, that drumbeat would become a deafening roar. This was not rain. It was a vertical ocean, a solid wall of water that blurred the entire world into a churning, green-grey chaos. The sky would be torn apart by lightning, not the sharp white flashes we know, but great silent sheets of purple and violet light that would illuminate the entire churning cloudscape for a few breathtaking seconds. In those brief, ghostly flashes, the world would be revealed. The giant trees, bending almost to the breaking point against the hurricane-force winds, the flash floods already turning the lowlands into a raging sea, the terrified eyes of a herd of triceratops huddled together against the deluge. For hours, perhaps for a full day, the world would cease to exist. There was only the wind, the water, and the purple flashes of light in the darkness. But these storms were not just an agent of destruction. They were the true architects of Laramidia. They were a force of violent rebirth. The floods they unleashed would sweep away the old and the weak, but they would also deposit a new, rich layer of fertile sediment across the plains. the very soil that would fuel the next explosion of plant life. The winds would topple ancient trees, opening up clearings in the dense forest canopy, allowing sunlight to reach the floor and new saplings to grow. The rain would replenish the swamps and the rivers, ensuring the continuation of the great aquatic ecosystem. When the storm finally passed and the sun broke through the clouds, it illuminated a world washed clean, a world wounded yet renewed. Every tree that still stood, every swamp that teemed with life, was a child of these great tempests. They had learned to endure, to bend, and to thrive within this endless cycle of destruction and creation. The storm was an engine of change, a great impersonal metronome that dictated the violent rhythm of this planet. But even within that colossal rhythm, smaller hearts kept their own time. Within the grand choreography of wind and water, of climate and geology, countless quieter dances unfolded. The dance of the hunter and the hunted, the rival and the mate, the fragile and the fierce. This was not a world of mindless monsters. It was a world of calculation, of memory, of instinct honed by generations. To survive here, brute strength was never enough. You had to know the steps. Consider the great herds of Triceratops. They were not a chaotic mob of animals. They were a complex, moving society with a clear hierarchy, a system forged in the crucible of constant danger. This hierarchy was maintained not through constant, bloody battle, but through ritual. Two great bull Triceratops, each a 10-ton behemoth of muscle and bone, would confront each other. It would begin with a display, the unfurling of their magnificent, colourfully patterned frills, a silent testament to their health and power. It would be followed by deep, rumbling bellows that would vibrate through the ground. If neither backed down, the dance would escalate. They would lock their great brow horns together, a tremendous crack echoing across the plain. It was not a fight to the death, but a contest of pure strength, a pushing match, a test of will and endurance to determine who was the stronger, the more dominant, the more worthy of leading the herd and passing on his genes. This was a dance of power, a way for the herd to learn who was its strongest protector without losing its valuable warriors in a fatal conflict. The dance of the predator was just as complex, and it changed throughout a lifetime. A young Tyrannosaurus was not the 9-ton king of its domain. It was a lesser prince, a creature that had to learn its trade. At this stage of its life, it was smaller, leaner, and built for speed. Its jaw, while powerful, was not yet the bone-shattering weapon it would one day become. It could not take on an adult Triceratops. So, it danced a different dance. It occupied a different ecological niche, hunting the smaller, faster prey of Laramidia. The ostrich-like Ornithomimus, the dome-headed Pachycephalosaurus, even the large raptors. Unlike the ambush style of its parents, the young T-Rex was a pursuit predator, using its long, powerful legs to run down its victims. This was a crucial part of the ecosystem. The young tyrants learned the skills of the hunt on the smaller creatures, honing their instincts, growing larger and stronger until the day they were ready to challenge the great horned dinosaurs and claim their throne. The species learned how to survive and dominate at every stage of its life. This was the nature of this world, a constant, co-evolutionary arms race, a 150-million-year-old dance. The herbivores evolved thicker armor, so the carnivores evolved stronger jaws. The prey evolved greater speed, so the predators evolved greater cunning. Every adaptation was met with an answer, every strength with a counter. This entire planet, this entire ecosystem, was like a single living organism, constantly learning, adapting, and refining itself. This was the grand dance of survival, a complex ballet of strategy, power, and adaptation. Every adult creature in this world was a master of this dance, a victor in a million small, daily battles. But every master begins as a novice. Every giant begins as something small, blind, and helpless. Before they could become a king or a matriarch, before they could learn the steps of the great dance, every creature had to face the most dangerous, most unforgiving trial of all, the very beginning. For in the world of the Cretaceous, to be born was a miracle. To survive childhood was the exception, not the rule. Let us return to the great herd of Triceratops. In a secluded clearing away from the main grazing grounds, a mother has built her nest. It is not a delicate thing of twigs and feathers, but a great mound of earth, rotting vegetation and mud. Inside this natural incubator, warmed by the decaying plants and the relentless Cretaceous sun, lie dozens of large, leathery eggs. For weeks, the mother has guarded them with a fierce devotion, rarely straying far, her great frill a warning to any predator that dares to approach. Then the moment arrives. A tiny crack appears on one of the eggs. A small beaked snout pushes through. Soon the entire nest is alive with the chipping and breaking of shells, and a new generation of Triceratops takes its first, wet, stumbling breath of the hot, humid air. They are perfect, miniature versions of their parents, their horns still soft nubs, their frills still flexible. They are a promise of the future, a new wave of life in this ancient world. But this world is not kind to promises. From the moment they hatch, they are no longer just life, they are food. The scent of the hatching is a dinner bell that rings across the ecosystem. The ever-watchful Trudden, hiding in the shadows of the ferns, sees not a new generation, but an opportunity. It waits for the single moment the mother is distracted, a split second to dart in and snatch a helpless hatchling. At night, the small mammalian Didelphodon might burrow up from beneath the nest to steal an egg. A passing snake, a large lizard, even a swarm of insects could pose a mortal threat to these fragile, bite-sized creatures. And the greatest predator of all was the world itself. A sudden torrential downpour from a seasonal storm could turn the nesting ground into a muddy torrent, drowning the young in their own nest. A sudden cold snap, however brief, could be fatal. Disease could sweep through the clutch, wiping out half of them in a matter of days. And so the brutal calculus of the Cretaceous begins. Of the dozens of hatchlings that break free from their eggs, only a handful will survive the first week. Of those, only a few will survive the first year, a period of frantic growth where they are still small enough to be hunted by the mid-sized predators of Laramidia. And of those, perhaps only one or two will ever reach the colossal size of their parents to finally join the great thundering dance of survival. This was the rhythm of their world. It was not a world built on the sanctity of individual life, but on the relentless continuation of the species. The sacrifice of the many, the unlucky, the weak, ensured the survival of the few, the strong, and the fortunate. Procreation was abundant, but survival was a rare and precious prize. This was the brutal reality of the Cretaceous, a world where life was everywhere, yet always on the edge of death. A world of abundance and scarcity, of creation and consumption, of endless struggle from the first breath to the last. But to truly understand this world, we must do more than witness its creatures or admire their strategies. We must breathe it. We must step beyond the safety of our distant observation and inhale the world as it was, to feel its heat, its moisture, and the invisible language that tied every living thing together. The air of the late Cretaceous was not merely hot and humid, it was dense with life itself. A thick, swirling mixture of scents and signals, a living code written in molecules instead of words. Its bass note was the smell of creation and decay intertwined, the sweet, heavy aroma of rotting vegetation, the earthy promise of new growth. After each torrential downpour, the world exhaled, releasing a storm-born fragrance unlike anything our modern earth remembers. The sharp clarity of rain striking ancient soil mingled with the breath of a billion strange leaves and blossoms. It was a world that spoke not through voices, but through the air itself, and woven into this constant green background were the messages, the scents that meant the difference between life and death. A great herd of triceratops carried with it a cloud of scent, a heavy, musky animal smell that was a declaration of their presence, a signal that could be read for miles. But within that cloud, a different scent, the sharp, metallic tang of blood from a wound on a single animal's flank, was a specific message. To a predator, it was a dinner bell ringing silently across the plains. The king of this world, the Tyrannosaurus, had its own unmistakable odor, a powerful, musky scent of a carnivore, a smell of absolute dominance that it would use to mark its territory. It was a chemical no trespassing sign, a warning that even the bravest creatures would obey. Its breath alone, a foul mix of carrion and infection, was a weapon of intimidation. The world's chemistry was a library of information. The earthy, damp smell of a mushroom blooming on a fallen log signaled a source of food for a small mammal. The cloying, sweet perfume of a giant magnolia blossom was an invitation to the first bees. Even the pungent, sulphurous whisper from the distant young mountains was a reminder of the planet's restless, fiery heart. This was the conversation of Laramidia, a constant chemical dialogue spoken in the language of molecules. In the dense, humid forests, scent was often more reliable than sight, more constant than sound. To be alive in the Cretaceous was to be perpetually reading this invisible world, navigating a map made not of landmarks, but of odors. It was the smell of a healthy, brutal, and perfectly balanced ecosystem. But on the other side of the planet, carried on the high stratospheric winds, a new and alien scent was beginning to mix with the familiar chemistry of life, a faint, acrid, and unnatural smell, the scent of a world beginning to poison itself. It was the smell of a sickness, a global fever rising from a volcanic wound that would not heal, and it was slowly, silently bringing this entire magnificent world to the brink of collapse. The rich chemical conversation of Laramidia, the language of life and death spoken in scent, was being interrupted. A new and alien message was being written into the wind. A faint, acrid smell carried on the high atmospheric currents from the other side of the planet. It was the scent of a global sickness, a planetary fever rising from a volcanic wound in the Earth's crust that would not heal. In what would one day become India, a cataclysm of an almost unimaginable scale was unfolding in slow motion. The Deccan Traps. This was not a single, explosive volcano. It was a vast, bleeding wound in the very skin of the planet, a region where the Earth's mantle was leaking pure, molten rock over the surface. For hundreds of thousands of years, wave after wave of lava flowed, eventually covering an area the size of modern-day France in a layer of black volcanic rock miles thick. But the true devastation was not caused by the lava. It was caused by the gases. With every pulse of magma, a colossal belch of sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide was released into the atmosphere. This was a slow, relentless poisoning of the entire global system. The sulfur dioxide would rise into the stratosphere and mix with water, forming vast, hazy clouds of sulfuric acid. The rains that fell across the planet, from Laramidia to Appalachia, were no longer pure. They were weakly acidic, slowly altering the chemistry of the oceans and stripping vital nutrients from the soils on land. The massive, sustained release of carbon dioxide, meanwhile, sent the planet's already warm climate into a chaotic series of spasms. The greenhouse effect was supercharged, leading to wild, unpredictable fluctuations in temperature. The world was trapped in a cycle of fever and chills. The kingdom of the dinosaurs was already dying. It was a slow, agonizing sickness. They did not see the volcanoes, and they did not understand the changing chemistry of the air. But they felt it. The plants they ate were less nutritious, stressed by the acid rains. The great seasonal storms, which had once been a predictable rhythm of life, became more erratic and more violent. The very air they breathed was becoming subtly toxic. The entire ecosystem was a sick body, its immune system compromised, its foundations weakened. The giants of the Cretaceous were living in a world that was slowly turning against them. The great Tyrannosaurus still hunted. The vast herds of Triceratops still roamed the plains. But their world was tarnished. The endless summer was becoming a fever dream. The ecosystem was weakened, stressed, fragile, and trembling on the edge of collapse. It might have, given another 1,000,000 years, found a new balance. It might have recovered, but it would not be given the chance. The world was already on its knees, and the final act of its story would not come from within, not from volcanoes or storms, but from the cold, indifferent silence of space. A single visitor, no larger than a mountain, carried the power to erase nearly everything Earth had ever created. When it came, it did not roar. It arrived in perfect silence, a streak of light tearing through the sky, brighter than 1,000 suns, moving faster than thought itself. And when it struck, the sound was not heard so much as felt. A vibration that would echo through 66 million years of stone and memory. The story of a lost world is not told in books. It is told in stone. To read it, we must learn to see as the geologists do, to understand that every layer beneath our feet was once alive, a swamp, a floodplain, a forest floor. Each layer is a page, and the earth, in all its patience, has kept the book open, a vast, silent library written in the language of sediment and time. Today, in the Badlands of Montana, within the layers of the famous Hell Creek Formation, paleontologists travel back in time. With each careful brushstroke that clears dust from a fossil, with each pickaxe blow that splits a layer of ancient mudstone, they are turning the pages of this library. Deeper and deeper they go, past the age of mammals, past the age of ice, until they reach the final chapters of the Cretaceous period. Here, the story is at its richest. The pages are filled with the bones of Triceratops, Edmontosaurus, and the great tyrant king himself. The layers of sandstone tell of the shining rivers that once flowed here. The thin seams of coal tell of ancient forests that were burned by lightning-sparked fires. The world is vibrant, full of life, full of drama. But then, as they dig deeper, closer to the end of the age, the story begins to change. The pages become darker, more chaotic. The fossils are more jumbled, a testament to the violent floods and the unstable climate created by the distant silent volcanoes. In these final layers of the Cretaceous, you find mud and ash and death all pressed together. And then you find the line. Across the entire globe, in every geological record from this exact moment in time, there is a boundary, a thin, dark line of clay, often no thicker than a human finger. Below this line, the world is a dinosaur's kingdom. The rock is filled with their colossal bones. Above this line, they are gone, all of them, instantly and forever. For decades, this line was the greatest mystery in all of geology, the final page of one volume and the first, empty page of the next. But then, scientists analyzed the chemical composition of this dark, thin layer, and they found its secret. It was saturated with an element that is incredibly rare on the surface of the Earth, but extremely common in asteroids and comets: iridium. This thin, dark line, the KPG boundary, is the gravestone of an entire world. It is the ash and the dust from a 10-kilometer-wide mountain of rock and metal that struck our planet at 60 times the speed of sound. It is the signature of the killer, the irrefutable physical proof of the day the sky fell. Geology is a silent historian, but its evidence speaks louder than any words. It does not speculate, it does not guess, it simply records. And the record is clear. Every stone, every fossil from this boundary layer carries within it the echo of the last heartbeat of an age. The stone does not lie. The hidden records of the earth tell a clear and brutal story. They show us a world that was already sick, and they reveal the calling card of the assassin, the cosmic bullet that was on its way. The evidence is all there, written in a language of iridium and ash, a post-mortem of a planet, but stone can only tell us what happened. It cannot tell us what it felt like to live it. What did the king see in his final moment? What did the forests sound like as the sky began to burn? To answer that, we must leave behind the silence of the rock and return just once to the living world. Let us travel back to that final, ordinary day. To the last heartbeat of a world that had no idea it was dying. It is a peaceful afternoon in Laramidia. A herd of triceratops drinks from a slow-moving river. High above, a pteranodon glides on the warm, heavy air. Life continues its ancient, unbroken rhythm, completely unaware that the world has less than a minute left. It begins not as a sound, but as a light. A new star appears in the daytime sky, a pinprick of impossible brightness that blossoms with terrifying speed. Within seconds, it is brighter than the sun itself, a second malevolent sun that casts sharp, unnatural shadows across the landscape. The creatures on the ground stop. The herd of triceratops looks up in confusion. Their primitive brains have no context for this silent, blinding apparition. This is the asteroid. A 10-kilometer-wide mountain of rock and metal heated to a white-hot incandescence as it tears through the Earth's atmosphere at 20 kilometers per second. It strikes the shallow sea of the Yucatan Peninsula. From the perspective of Laramidia, 1,000 miles away, there is no sound, no explosion. There is only a silent, world-ending flash. The horizon erupts in a dome of pure, white light, as if the sun itself has fallen from the sky and shattered on the ground. The energy released in this single instant is 1 billion times more powerful than the atomic bombs that would be created on this planet 66 million years later. A wound, 100 miles wide and 20 miles deep, is punched into the crust of the Earth. And then, the first wave of destruction arrives. It travels at the speed of light, a thermal pulse, a wave of unimaginable heat, a radiant blast that sweeps across the continent. The temperature on the ground leaps to over 3,000 degrees Celsius. The world is flash-cooked. The great inland sea boils. The lush tropical forests of Laramidia, the endless green world, explode into a continent-spanning wall of fire. The air itself becomes an oven, incinerating any living thing that is not sheltered. The age of giants, the dynasty of the dinosaurs, is dealt its fatal blow in a matter of silent, incandescent minutes. The coasts of the continent literally melt. The world of green is replaced by a world of black ash and glowing embers. The fire had passed, but it was not the end. It was merely the prelude. The impact had thrown trillions of tons of pulverized rock, superheated ash, and vaporized water high above the atmosphere, a dark inheritance that would now begin its slow, inexorable journey around the globe. The blinding, white-hot day was over. The long, cold, and absolute night was about to begin. The age of fire was ending, and the winter of fire and ash was coming. The age of fire was brief, measured in minutes and hours. It was a cleansing inferno that swept across the face of the planet. But what came next was slower, quieter, and infinitely more lethal. The blinding, white-hot day was over. The long, cold, and absolute night was about to begin. The trillions of tons of pulverized rock, soot, and ash that had been blasted into the sky did not simply fall back down. The lightest particles remained suspended high in the stratosphere, where they were carried by the jet streams, forming a thick, impenetrable shroud that encircled the entire globe. Within a matter of days, the sun began to dim. Then it vanished completely. Day turned into a perpetual, starless twilight, a darkness that would last for months, perhaps even years. Sunlight reaching the Earth's surface was reduced by over 90%, and with the darkness came the cold. The planet's hothouse climate, which had sustained the giants for millions of years, collapsed. Temperatures plummeted, and the once tropical world began to freeze under its own dark sky. But the true killer was not the cold. It was starvation. Photosynthesis, the simple magical process that turns sunlight into life, the very foundation of almost every food chain on the planet, stopped. The great green ocean of plants that had covered Laramidia began to wither and die in the darkness and the cold. In the seas, the plankton, the base of the entire marine ecosystem, perished in a massive global die-off. The engine of the planet had stalled, and the world itself had become toxic. The sulfur-rich particles in the atmosphere mixed with the water vapor, creating clouds of sulfuric acid. For months on end, a black, acidic rain fell from the sky. This rain poisoned the lakes and rivers and burned the leaves of the few plants that were still struggling to survive. The oceans, which had absorbed so much of this acid, became toxic to the creatures with shells, like the great ammonites, which dissolved in the corrosive water. This was not an ice age, it was an ash age, a world painted in monochrome. The vibrant greens and blues of the Cretaceous were gone, replaced by a uniform, depressing palette of grey and black. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and decay, a toxic fog that made every breath a struggle. The great herbivore herds, the survivors of the initial firestorm, now faced an enemy they could not fight. Their world, once an endless buffet, was now an empty, poisoned table. They starved in the darkness, their colossal bodies collapsing in the ashen fields. And as the great plant-eaters fell, the fate of the great hunters was sealed. The food chain, a complex and magnificent structure built over 150 million years, had crumbled from the bottom up in less than a single year. The age of giants was ending not with a final glorious battle, but with a slow, silent, and agonizing whimper. And somewhere in this cold, dark, and dying world, a king was walking alone, searching for a kingdom that no longer existed. In the perpetual twilight of the Ash Age, a grey shadow moves across a grey landscape. It is a ghost haunting the ruins of its own fallen kingdom. This is the last Tyrannosaurus, the last king. He is walking alone because there is no one else left. The great herds that once shook the earth are gone, their colossal skeletons now silent, white monuments under a sunless sky. The air, once a rich map of scents, now carries only the monotonous, acrid smell of ash and decay. His powerful sense of smell, the very tool that made him a king, is now a curse, a constant reminder of the world that has vanished. He is hungry, a deep, gnawing hunger that has been his constant companion for weeks. His immense 9-ton body, built for an age of abundance, is now a liability, a furnace that demands a fuel that no longer exists. His once mighty muscles are weakened, his skin stretched taut over his colossal frame. He is in pain. An old injury, a set of cracked ribs from a fall in the darkness or a desperate, forgotten struggle, sends a sharp, stabbing pain with every breath. One of his great railroad spike teeth is infected, a constant throbbing agony in his jaw. In the world before, these would have been survivable injuries. But now, in this new, unforgiving world, they are a death sentence. Nature does not forgive weakness. He is walking, perhaps out of instinct, searching for a scent that will never come, listening for a sound that will never be made again. Or perhaps he is just walking, because to stop is to surrender. To stop is to die. He walks past the fossilized trees, through the silent, ashen swamps. This was all his. This was his empire. Now it is his tomb. There will be no final, glorious hunt, no epic battle. The age of giants does not end with a roar. It ends with a stumble. His great legs, which once carried him across this continent with terrifying speed, can no longer support his own weight. He stumbles, his massive body crashing to the ashen ground with a low, heavy thud. He tries to rise, a flicker of the old tyrant's defiance in his ancient reptilian eye. But there is no strength left. He lies in the cold grey dust. The acidic rain begins to fall again, mixing with the ash, covering his great body in a thin grey shroud. He takes one final ragged breath. It is not a roar. It is a quiet, weary exhalation of poisoned air. That final breath is the closing note of the Cretaceous period, the final silent word in the 150 million year-long story of the dinosaurs. The last tyrant king was dead. With his fall, the age of reptiles was finally and truly over. A silence, deeper than any that had come before, fell over the ashen landscape. It was the silence of a completed chapter, the silence of a world holding its breath. But it would not be a permanent silence. For in the tunnels beneath the king's final resting place and in the sheltered crevices of the dead forests, a different kind of heartbeat, faint but persistent, was waiting. Waiting for the long night to end, waiting for their turn. The last tyrant king was dead. A silence, profound and absolute, had fallen over the ash-covered continents. It was the silence of a completed chapter, but it would not be a permanent silence. For in the tunnels beneath the king's final resting place, in the murky waters of the poisoned rivers, and in the sheltered crevices of the dead forests, a different kind of heartbeat, faint but persistent, was waiting. Waiting for the long night to end. Waiting for their turn. The survivors of the great extinction were not the strong, the large, or the powerful. The meek, as it turned out, would inherit the earth, and their strategies for survival were as varied as they were ingenious. First, there were the hiders, our distant ancestors, the small furry mammals who had spent 100 million years living in the shadows of the dinosaurs. Their entire existence had been a training exercise for this very moment. When the sky turned to fire, they were not caught out in the open. They were already in their bunkers, deep in subterranean burrows that shielded them from the worst of the initial heat blast. When the long, cold night fell, their small size became their greatest advantage. A small body requires far less fuel. They were not picky eaters. While the giant herbivores starved for lack of specific plants, these small opportunists could survive on anything they could find in the ashen soil: insects, worms, the roots of hardy ferns, and the abundant carrion of the fallen giants. Their warm blood, a feature that had long been a metabolic expense, now allowed them to stay active in the freezing darkness. They did not conquer the dying world, they endured it. Then there were the heirs of the sky. The dinosaur lineage did not die with the T-Rex. A few small feathered branches of the family tree survived. The birds, many of them survived for a simple reason. They had beaks and they could eat seeds. While the leaves and forests of the world had withered in the darkness, the seeds of those plants could lie dormant and protected in the soil for years, a hidden larder of life waiting for the sun to return. Other bird lineages, the ancestors of our modern ducks and shorebirds, survived in the aquatic ecosystems which, though devastated, recovered faster than the land. And in the water itself, the true ancients waited, the crocodiles and the turtles. These were living fossils, lineages that had already survived previous mass extinctions. Their strategy was patience. As cold-blooded creatures, their metabolism was incredibly slow. They could go for months, perhaps even a year, without a single meal, entering a state of near hibernation in the cold, murky water. The rivers and swamps, which acted as a buffer against the most extreme temperature swings, became their refuge. They simply waited out the apocalypse, as their ancestors had done for eons. For months or years, these were the secret inhabitants of a dead world. The hiders, the seed-eaters, and the patient waiters. And then, slowly, the sky began to change. The thick, black shroud of soot began to thin, and for the first time in years, perhaps decades, light touched the earth again. The first rays were weak, pale and ghostly, filtering through the dust like a memory of sunlight. But they were enough. The survivors, the small, the hidden, the patient, began to emerge. They stepped out into a world that was silent, empty, a planet without titans, without kings. It was a blank canvas. The age of giants was over. The age of the quiet survivors had begun. For years they had endured a twilight world of ash, clinging to life in burrows, swamps and shadowed waters. But the earth, even wounded, remembered how to heal. Slowly, patiently, the great veil of dust began to settle back to the ground. And one day, for the first time in a generation, the sky turned blue again. As the first true sunlight warmed the ashen soil of this new world, something stirred. A different kind of life, a different kind of story, the story of us. The creatures that emerged from their burrows and shelters looked upon a world that was utterly transformed, unrecognizable. The dense, multi-layered forests of the Cretaceous were gone, replaced by a strange, almost alien landscape. The first to recolonize the barren, ash-fertilized soil were the great opportunists of the plant kingdom, the ferns. For centuries, the world was a monotonous, endless sea of green ferns, a fern spike that covered continents in a low, uniform blanket. But beneath this initial wave of green, a slower, more colorful revolution was taking place. The seeds of the flowering plants, which had lain dormant in the soil throughout the long night, began to sprout. Color returned to the world. First in small tentative patches, then in great explosive waves of blossoms. The world was healing. The garden was regrowing. Yet this new world was quiet in a way it hadn't been for 150 million years. The ground no longer trembled with the footfalls of 9-ton herds. The air no longer echoed with the deep, booming calls of the hadrosaurs. The terrifying roar of the tyrant king was now just a fading memory, a ghost in the geological record. The giants were gone. Their absence left behind a profound, almost unnerving emptiness. The planet felt smaller, safer, but less majestic. But the silence of the giants was being replaced by a new, different kind of music, a faster, warmer, more intricate sound. It was the sound of the frantic, opportunistic, and rapidly multiplying heartbeat of the mammals. With their great reptilian competitors gone, the world was theirs for the taking. It was the greatest evolutionary opportunity in the history of life on Earth. The small, shrew-like survivors of the great dying exploded into a riot of new forms, a chaotic and creative frenzy of evolution known as the Paleocene radiation. In the millions of years that followed the extinction, they diversified to fill every vacant niche. Some became herbivores, some became carnivores. Some learned to climb trees, some returned to the water. They were experimental creatures, nature's first drafts for a new age, a gallery of strange beasts that would be the ancestors of every mammal on Earth today. The silence of a world without dinosaurs was being filled by the rustle, the squeak, the breath, and the relentless, warm-blooded energy of the age of mammals. The ashes of the old world had become the fertile soil for the new. The catastrophe that ended one dynasty had cleared the stage for the beginning of another. And from this chaotic, creative explosion of life, Born from the fire and the ash, the first seeds of our own distant lineage would begin their long, slow, and improbable journey towards consciousness. The first rays of sunlight on the new world revealed a blank canvas, an earth scrubbed clean by fire and ash, emptied of its ancient kings. From the chaotic, creative explosion of life that followed, the first seeds of our own distant lineage began their long and improbable journey. These were the children of fire and ash, the inheritors of a fallen kingdom. The first to claim their inheritance were the direct descendants of the dinosaurs themselves, the birds. The great leathery-winged pterosaurs were gone forever. The sky was an open territory, a vacant throne waiting for a new ruler. The toothed birds of the Cretaceous had also vanished, but their cousins, the ones with modern, toothless beaks, better suited for a world where seeds and insects were the most reliable food, had survived, and they thrived. In the millions of years that followed, they exploded in diversity. The first true owls began to hunt in the recovering forests, their silent flight a new kind of terror for the nocturnal mammals. In some parts of the world, great flightless terror birds briefly took the place of the dinosaurs, becoming apex predators in their own right. The sky, once ruled by the silent glide of the pterosaurs, was now filled with the flapping, chirping, and endlessly adaptable energy of a new avian dynasty. And on the ground, the great takeover was underway. The age of reptiles was over. The age of mammals had begun. The small furry creatures that had spent 100 million years hiding from the giants emerged from their burrows into a world of opportunity. With the great predators gone, the evolutionary brakes were off. What followed was a frenzy of creation. For the next few million years, the Earth became a grand laboratory, with mammalian evolution trying out every possible design to fill the empty roles left behind by the dinosaurs. Some became fast, gazelle-like herbivores, grazing on the new plants. Some became powerful, bear-like predators. Some returned to the rivers and oceans, beginning the long journey that would eventually lead to dolphins and whales. Some stayed in the trees, developing the grasping hands and forward-facing eyes that would, one day, define the primate lineage. Our lineage. This new world was a world of warm blood and fur, of milk and parental care, of larger brains and adaptable behavior. The silence of the giants was replaced by a new, faster, and more complex music, the relentless, opportunistic heartbeat of the mammals. The great cataclysm was not just an ending, it was a beginning. The death of one era was the necessary price for the birth of another. The fire from the sky that had killed the magnificent Tyrannosaurus was the very same fire that cleared the path for that first, tiny primate to climb a tree and look out upon a world that was now his to inherit. And so, the children of fire and ash claimed the earth. The birds conquered the sky, and the mammals inherited the land. A new world was born, a world of fur and feather, of fast hearts and clever minds. A world that would, after 66 million years of patience and persistence, lead to us. But this new world was not built on nothing. It rose from a foundation of ghosts, from the bones buried deep beneath our feet, from the echoes of roars that once shook the air we breathe. The memory of the giants was not erased, it endured, in the shape of a bird's wing, in the curve of a mammal's spine, in the shared, silent code of DNA. We are their descendants, their final experiment, their living memory. The story of the Age of Titans did not end 66 million years ago. It simply changed its form and began again through us. We live inside their memory. We just have to remember how to listen. Outside your window, the song of a small bird. It is a simple, familiar sound, but it is also an echo, a 66 million-year-old echo. That bird is a living dinosaur. Its hollow bones, a marvel of lightweight engineering, were an invention perfected by its raptor-like ancestors to make them faster and more agile. Its feathers, which catch the morning light, first evolved on dinosaurs not for flight, but for warmth and for vibrant display. Its sharp, intelligent eyes, which dart back and forth, are the same eyes that once scanned the Cretaceous undergrowth for danger. The song it sings is a melody played on an ancient instrument. It is the distant, transformed, and unbroken legacy of a roar that once shook the world. T-Rex is dead, but the birds still sing his song. The memory is also in the stone. Every fossil is not a dead object. It is a story that has been patiently waiting to be told. When a paleontologist's brush sweeps the dust from the fossilized tooth of a Tyrannosaurus, they are not just cleaning a piece of bone. They are touching a moment in time. They are feeling the last trace of a creature that once tasted the hot, humid air of a lost world. Every bone in every museum, every shard of amber, every fossilized footprint hardening in the desert sun is a word in a language that is 66 million years old. A library made of stone. And the memory is deeper still. It is in the very chemistry of our world. The DNA that coils inside every cell of your body is a part of an unbroken 4 billion-year-old chain of information. That chain survived the Great Dying. It was carried in the bodies of the small, furry creatures that hid in the darkness. We are, in the most literal sense, the descendants of the survivors of that apocalypse. The memory of that struggle, the blueprint for that resilience, is written into our own biological code. Even the energy that powers our modern world is a part of this memory. The oil and the natural gas that we pull from deep within the earth is the liquid ghost of the Cretaceous. It is the compressed, transformed remains of the trillions of microscopic plankton that once filled the western interior seaway. The sunlight that fell on the age of dinosaurs was captured by these tiny organisms, and we, millions of years later, are releasing that ancient sunlight to power our cities and our cars. We are a civilization fueled by the ghosts of a fallen empire. And finally, the memory is in the wind. Stand in the Badlands of Montana, in the heart of the Hell Creek Formation, and close your eyes. The wind that blows across these empty, silent plains is the same wind that once carried the scent of a Triceratops herd. The vast open spaces are a testament to the sheer scale of the beings that once walked here. The land itself remembers them, the shape of the hills, the curve of the ancient riverbeds, the sheer, crushing emptiness of the landscape. It is all a monument to their absence. America was once the land of giants, and in a way those giants still walk here, not as flesh and bone, but as a feeling in the air, a presence in the vastness of the land. They walk in the wind. This memory is everywhere. In the song of a bird, in the heart of a stone, in our own blood, and in the whisper of the wind. The giants are gone, but they are not forgotten. Because the Earth itself is a living archive of their time, geology does not forget, and in its final, silent testimony, it gives us the most profound lesson of all. The memory of the giants is everywhere, in the song of a bird, in the heart of a stone, in our own blood, and in the whisper of the wind. They are gone, but they are not forgotten, because the Earth itself is a living archive of their time. Geology does not forget. And in its final, silent testimony, it gives us the most profound lesson of all. The Earth remembers everything. Every layer of rock is a page. Every grain of sand is a word. The slow, patient rhythm of sedimentation, of mountains rising and eroding, is the steady heartbeat of the planet, and each beat records a moment in time. It remembers the first single-celled life in the ancient oceans. It remembers the strange creatures of the Cambrian explosion. It remembers the great, silent forests of the Carboniferous. And it remembers the age of dinosaurs. It remembers the thunderous footfall of a Tyrannosaurus on what was then soft mud and is now hard stone. Each layer stores a heartbeat. Today, you can stand on a quiet, sun-drenched prairie in Montana. You can listen to the buzz of a bee and watch the wildflowers bend in the gentle breeze. It is a scene of profound peace. But just beneath that thin layer of soil, just inches below your feet, may lie the fossilized vertebra of a triceratops or the shattered tooth of a T-Rex. The world we see, this gentle, colorful world of flowers, is a garden growing on the grave of a world of giants. This is the final lesson. The land where the dinosaurs walked is now full of flowers. The death of one world was the necessary price for the birth of another. The asteroid was not an ending, it was a transformation, a violent, brutal, and world-shattering reset that cleared the stage for a new story to be told. The story of the Tyrannosaurus Rex is, in the end, not a story of failure. It is a testament to success. A story of a dynasty that ruled this planet with absolute power for an almost unimaginable 150 million years. They survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and continental drift. They were, in every sense of the word, the true masters of this planet. It took a mountain falling from the sky to end their reign. Their world is over. The thick, humid air they breathed is gone. The strange alien plants they ate are gone. The great inland sea they drank from is gone. But life is not. The force of life is more resilient than any single species, no matter how powerful. It is more stubborn than any planetary cataclysm. It endures the fire. It survives the long night. It waits in the ashes, in the tunnels, in the seeds, in the water. And when the sun returns, it begins again. Always. The world of T-Rex is gone. It is a memory, a magnificent ghost in the stone. We live in the quiet, gentle age that followed its thunderous fall. We look at the same sky, but the breath of the giants no longer fills the air. But the planet remembers. With every bird that sings a song its ancestors learned in the shadow of a king, with every flower that blooms over a buried colossal bone, with every drop of oil that we pull from the deep, the earth remembers. The story of the dinosaurs is over, but the story of life is never ending.